One thing I try to be really focused on is the verb. Every time you write is or are or was, think about, do I actually really have to use this, or is there a verb out there that actually means this, that I don't have to rely on those sort of lazy verbs is what I call them.
Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage. Hey everybody! So what happens when an antiques dealer and amateur sleuth stumbles upon a long-lost recording that may rewrite the history of jazz? The answer is between the grooves of the Bolden Cylinder, a new mystery novel from Norman Woolworth that we'll be exploring in today's episode of Authors on Mission. So get ready for a freewheeling jam session of a conversation as we talk about the book's intricate plot, writing life, and the what-ifs that emerge when buried secrets rise to the surface. Without further ado, Norman, welcome to the Authors on Mission podcast.
Thanks for having me, Danielle. I look forward to this.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So stick around because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation. Of course, me too. This is a very exciting book, and I'm excited to dive right in. But before we do, I'd like to learn a little bit about you. So, tell me a little bit about yourself. What inspired you to start writing fiction after your corporate career?
Well, I retired during the pandemic and was looking for something to occupy my time. I have a writing background, and I always saw myself writing books. I actually envisioned that it would more likely be nonfiction because I was a journalist earlier in my career. But I started playing around. This is the second book, and it's a series. Um, but I started playing around. I had done an ancestral research project for my mother that through which I found out I had an ancestor in New Orleans who was Andrew Jackson's purser in the Battle of New Orleans. And then I looked into where he was interred, and that cemetery got deconsecrated. So anyway, it's a long story, but there was some neat little things to work with, and I invented the character of Bruno Abelard, my antique store owner protagonist, and one thing led to another, and now book two is done.
Awesome. Yeah. So it's a series then. I actually wasn't quite sure. I didn't realize that. So how about the first book? Tell us a little bit about that one. It started this journey. What can we expect from your first book?
So the first book right here is called The Lafitte Affair, and it concerns the pirate Jean Lafitte, who you may know is a rather enigmatic historical figure in a different way than Buddy Bolden is. But depending on who you talk to, Lafitte was a fiend or a hero or a man, an honorable man or inveterate liar. And, he's kind of whoever you want him to be. But it concerns a grave robbery in the present day, and and a antebellum actress by the name of Jane Placide, who's a real person, and an affair that may or may not have occurred between the two of them in the 1820s.
Understood. So did it actually occur within your book, or is that perhaps a spoiler for people to learn about?
It's not a spoiler. It's to say that yes, it does. There's a lot of other stuff going on in the book, and I won't get into too much of that. But this is where we introduce Bruno and the whole cast of characters who come back again in the second book and again in the third book with some characters having larger roles or smaller roles, you know, in each book.
Okay. Well, so we have two books down, and is there more to come?
Yes, I'm about three-quarters of the way through book three.
Wow, that's really exciting. So
And
anybody,
all of them are basically set in present day New Orleans, but there's like a present day crime that connects to a historical mystery,
hmm,
and they sort of run concurrently. So there's vignettes from earlier points in time. In the case of the Bolden Cylinder, that would be the turn of the 20th century, roughly, as well as sometime in the 1960s. So we go back and forth in time a bit.
Okay, well, that's really interesting to know. But in addition to that, I think that's so cool that you weave together historical facts with, something more, modern and, fictional. So that must have been a crazy plot process for you to make everything work so intricately together. Can you walk us through that a little bit, that planning process of yours?
Well, to call it a process gives it more credit than it deserves. As I have gotten to know other authors, I have found that there are two types of authors. One are called plotters, and the other are called pantsers, as in seat of. And I am definitely in the latter category. So I sort of have a general concept in mind, and then I put characters in situations, and the thing just sort of evolves. And undoubtedly, I always get to a point where, oh no, what happens now? I'm really stuck. And then something will occur to me, which will then make me have to go back and change stuff that I had written earlier. So it's not the most efficient way to go about this, but it seems to be the only way I'm really, I can't sit down and write a detailed outline.
Understood. And that's probably just part of your creative process as well. If you have the idea, you don't want to, spend time planning it out. You'd rather just let the passions flow onto the page. So I can see where it comes from there. And everybody does have their unique process. So for you, it's just kind of getting started and putting those ideas out there. But what about research? I mean, this is a huge historical, type book. So what kind of research did you have to do to realistically portray, New Orleans and jazz history and cylinder
Right.
recordings? What was that like?
So the way I research is I tend to read widely before I start writing, just to sort of build my foundational knowledge. But then as I'm setting specific scenes or, I'm looking for a detail, then you know, I hop onto Google and see what I can find kind of thing. And it's not as historically intricate as you might think. So if I can just step back for a second, explain what this book is about, and
Sure thing.
your listeners might understand a little better. So, Buddy Bolden is sometimes, actually, usually credited as being the first or one of the first jazz musicians. The theory is that he took ragtime and the blues and put them together, and out of that came a sound that nobody had heard before. But he's a very sort of mysterious historical figure because he left behind no known recordings. And he had a very brief reign as King Bolden, as he was known in New Orleans around the turn of the 20th century. And then he goes insane and he spends the last 25 years of his life in a sanitarium. And all we know about him really is from contemporaries of his who were interviewed 20 and 30 years later when journalists and academics started to take jazz seriously as an art form. But nobody who's alive has ever heard him play a note. Yet,
Hmm.
he's credited as being this, really important pioneer. And what's also interesting is that and those accounts, by the way, don't always agree with each other. So you're never entirely sure who the reliable narrators are, if you will. But one thing they tend to agree on is that Buddy was not a virtuosic musician. He was not, he was not schooled. He didn't read music like most of the musicians of the day who could keep time and so on and so forth. Um, so he played a raw, grittier style of music and apparently louder style of music than anybody else. And it drew crowds like crazy. He was famous for what he called calling my children home, which so he would some band would be set up playing somewhere, he would set up nearby and call his children home, and everybody would flock to him and leave the other band, where they were. This is
Oh
all,
my goodness.
yeah, this is the lore. So super interesting character who's a little bit of a blank slate, which appealed to me.
Understood. Well, that's so cool that you kind of derived all of this from those stories and turn it into a character within your book and also use that as a platform to give more historical information to the readers. It's just very clever. And really exciting too. So let's go into this a little bit more. I mean, he has a really personal life along with the musical life. He has a relationship with Sally, which I saw, it's kind of interwoven with the main mystery. So, why did you decide to include the personal dimension along with his career and the mystery itself?
So you're talking about Bruno, who's the modern day protagonist.
Exactly.
Right, yes. So he's an antique store owner. Well, I envisioned this as a series from the outset. So, I wanted a protagonist who people would find hopefully charming or at least interesting. He's sort of this curmudgeonly, uh, very intelligent, but also, he has a lot of ticks, if you will, and can be a little bit self-involved. And so he has this on again, off again relationship with his girlfriend Sally, and he has a childhood friend, Bo Duplessis, who is a property crimes detective with NOPD. And their relationship, and Bo actually narrates some of the chapters, so which gives you a view of Bruno different from his own view of himself. Plus, Bo is able to sort of guide you through the police procedural aspects of the modern day investigation.
Understood. Okay. Well, yeah, thank you for kind of walking us through that. So there's many different characters here and different perspectives to kind of give readers different cues as to what they could be looking for and able to solve the mystery itself. So that's really awesome to think about. So tell us a little bit more about this. I'm curious to know more. So we talked about, the plots, some of the characters. What about the setting itself? I mean, you did grow up in New Orleans, right? So did you kind of just
I
learn
didn't grow up in New Orleans. I went to school to college there.
in college? Okay.
And I lived there for 5 years. I met my wife there. Get back as often as I can. The city occupies a large piece of real estate in my head. Um, and readers have commented that in both books, the city is sort of a character itself, atmospherically, culturally, food wise, et cetera. So sights, sounds, all that kind of stuff. And that's actually rewarding to hear because it's certainly something I've tried to incorporate.
Understood. So yeah, that's something that a lot. If you have never been there, you probably wouldn't be able to describe it to readers the same way that you did. So it's good that you're kind of using those memories and turning that into the details of the book that brings it to life. So that's
Yeah,
really
one of the things I try to do too. So it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine that when people go to New Orleans for, I don't know, conventions or maybe just for vacation or Mardi Gras, whatever it is, they tend not to get very far past the French Quarter. Maybe they have a tour of the Garden District or something. But like all great cities, New Orleans is a city of neighborhoods, and so I try to, and most of which tourists never get to. So I've tried to set scenes in some of those places, featuring old neighborhood, watering holes and eating spots and that sort of thing, to hopefully, stoke curiosity about exploring more of the city than people typically would.
That's really awesome to think about. I mean, you're right. I've never visited there myself, but as a tip, just a visitor, I'd probably stay in that one area rather than exploring the rest of it, and really immersing in the culture. So it's great that you're able to take that and turn it into the book. So, guys, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that, not only getting immersed in the world of jazz, but also the settings too. Well, Norman does a great job of doing that. But to kind of move forward then into in more of the writing routine itself, I'm curious to know if there's a certain routine you followed. Did you write at a particular time of the day? Was there any certain tips or tricks that helped you when you got writer's block? What was it like for you?
So it's interesting. I don't really get writer's block. That hasn't been a problem. I don't sit and stare at my screen. But I'm the kind of writer who, there's some writers who they just want to get it all down and then they'll go back and, pretty it up. I'm not that way at all. I keep going back again and again and again, honing, paragraphs, sentences, whatever. So, it's quite linear, my process. I don't jump ahead chapters and, come back. And then it's also, revision heavy. And because, as I said earlier, I'm not much of one for plotting things out too far in
Yeah.
advance. That I cause issues for myself because, when something will finally occur to me, and I'm on chapter 16, then, oh God, now I've got to go back and make sure that chapter 3 and 7 and 8, conform to this. So that's kind of the way I work. As far as time of day, I tend to write more in the morning, but it's not always that way. I will, sometimes write a couple thousand words in a day. Other days I might write 200. but it's not because I'm sitting there staring at the screen. It's because I might be researching something. I might be revising. I might just be, taking a little time to think about what comes next plot wise, that sort of thing.
Okay, yeah. So I guess that's kind of something that everybody can learn from, just go ahead and write. And even if you have to go back later and change things, well, at the end of the day, that's how the book gets written itself. And, you don't need to get too intensive about that outline because it worked well for you. And that's something to learn from. So, that moving forward, I'm wondering if you would like to offer any other writing tips to the audience today. I mean, that was a great tip right there, but was there anything else that worked for you in particular that you think others might be able to benefit from?
I think everybody, has to you kind of have to find what works for you. There's definitely, multiple ways to go about this. One thing, this goes back to an old high school English teacher I had, but one thing I try to be really focused on is, the most important word in a sentence is the verb. And so
Okay.
I try to really choose my verbs carefully. And this high school English teacher, I'll never forget this. He used to allow us two incidents of the verb to be and the verb to have per page. Now,
Mm.
that's a lot harder than you might think.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
but it instilled a lifelong habit that I think has served me well, and I hopefully others that took classes from him, because when I think there's a tendency when you think about writing or pretty writing or whatever, to hone in on adjectives, sort of the decorative words, but really those aren't the words that propel the writing. It's the verbs. That's from my point of view anyway.
Yeah, that's a very straightforward and like challenging but simple task for people to follow. To see how many verbs are in your sentences, fix them out if you need to. Keep that rule in mind. Maybe that helped you as you grew up, or other people that you
Yeah,
can only have like that much per
right.
page.
Every time you write is or are, or was, think about, do I actually really have to use this, or is there a verb out there that actually means this? You know, that I don't have to rely on those sort of lazy verbs is what I call them.
Understood. And so it's kind of a very tedious process regardless, really thinking about every type of word or if can you place some out. But at the end of the day, it's needed to be done. It's important, especially to elevate your writing to the way it's now. And clearly it worked for you because you are on book three. So before we talk about that though, you have the cover of the book right there in front of you. Wonder if you'd like to show it off to the audience so we can chat about it a little bit.
Sure. So this is a depiction of a room in the sanitarium where Buddy was. That's not necessarily a you know real life rendition, but you get the basic idea across. And there is a cornet that's on the bed. The cornet is the instrument that Buddy played, which is sort of they're still around, but all the trumpet players that you think of, Louis Armstrong, King Oliver, they all started out playing the cornet, and then eventually the trumpet became more popular. But yeah, it's sort of sets the mood, if you will.
Yeah, and very symbolic too.
Mhm.
I'm curious to know, did you create it yourself or did somebody assist you in the design work?
Nope, the publisher did that. Shout out to Sean Riley Simmons, who's quite good at this stuff.
Yeah, and well, clearly they did a good job. It looks great. And were you able to approve it at least before it went out the
Oh
cover? I mean,
yes, yes.
yeah.
I was consulted about concepts, and this is sort of one concept that I came up with, and then I was sent three options, and
And then
you
you
know,
pick this one.
and this well, I picked this one, and then we sort of refined it a little bit from there. So I was certainly consulted and kept in the loop, and it was a good process.
Understood. Well, I think that we have that down. Let's transition to your other books. What can we be excited for in your newest release that you're working on?
Well, the third one involves the Ursuline nuns, who occupy a very important place in New Orleans history. They were there almost at the beginning. The first nuns arrived in 1727, and they're still there, operating the Ursuline Academy, which is the oldest girls' private school in the country. also the oldest Catholic school in the country. And in fact, sort of the crime that sets off the plot for the rest of the book occurs at the shrine of Our Lady of Prompt Succor, which is the chapel adjoining Ursuline Academy.
Understood. So kind of like the cliffhanger then. Wow, I think we're all going to be really excited to learn more about that one. That's something I never actually heard too much about. So definitely going to open people's eyes.
The Ursulines are fascinating because
Yeah.
if you think about it, they were there through French rule, Spanish rule, then French rule, then, American uh, government takes over, and then we have the Civil War and the Confederacy, and then Union occupation, and then you have Reconstruction and Jim Crow, and they're there throughout the whole thing, and really thriving in in a very sort of patriarchal world, and doing quite well for themselves. They were
Oh,
also in the early days. They were the hospital. They were the school. In fact, the Order of Saint Ursula, their mission really is to educate girls and women. And New Orleans had an incredibly high female literacy rate compared to the rest of the country in the early part of the 19th century, including teaching some slaves to read.
wow. Yeah, I see. I never really knew about that. So this is the reason why we have to pick up our books, Norman's books, I mean, and learn a little bit more, but also having fun with the story. So perfect stuff. It's really cool that we can learn more about that. Is there a certain release date though that we should be looking out for?
Probably July or August of next year, but we don't have a firm date quite yet. It's somewhat dependent on me actually finishing the thing. So
Yeah, that would be a big factor, but I guess that's
yeah,
another
yeah,
lesson I'll learn is that, hey, all you have to do is, keep trying each time and you never know what'll come of it.
right, right.
So if people want to get in touch with you and learn more about that upcoming release and, other exciting events in your life, what's the best place for people to head to?
Best place to go is my website, which is www.normanwoolworth.com. But you can buy these books anywhere books are sold. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any of the online book selling platforms. Your local bricks and mortar store, if they haven't stocked it, they can order it for you. So really, they should be easy to find. And if you just Google the title, the Bolden Cylinder, you'll see reviews out there, a couple other interviews like this one, that sort of stuff.
Well, perfect. Okay, well, easy as that. Just type in the name of the book, Bolden Cylinder, and you'll be able to, get in touch, stay connected, and learn a little more about the books.
Yeah.
All this being said, then, I'm curious to know any other words of guidance you'd like to offer for everybody as we're wrapping up the show. What's a piece of homework they should try out after hearing the conversation as they continue with their days?
If they are aspiring writers, I really encourage them to try that exercise that I talked about of writing a few pages and limiting yourself to just start with the verb to be, and then you can maybe expand it to the verb to have, but just try limiting yourself to two versions of the verb to be per page, and I think you'll find that it will improve your writing.
Absolutely. And that's very easy for people to do. Just make a copy of the first two pages and see what happens. It might sound so much better and you just gave away an industry secret. Well, that's awesome though. It's perfect. It's been a perfect conversation with you. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing more about your books, the cover, the history behind it, your personal experiences too. It's been a pleasure. So thank you so much for your insights.
Well, it's been a pleasure for me as well. Thank you so much for having me on.
Of course. And to all of our listeners, we've reached the end of today's session. So if you're interested, please check out Norman Woolworth on all of the links we just talked about. We're going to put in the description box of this podcast today. The Bolden Cylinder is a unique take on history and narrative and excitement, mystery. So click on over and get to learn a little bit more. Until next time, thanks for listening. And remember that there's no statute of limitations on discovering your own inner truth. So go ahead and write your own book sometime too. We'll see you next time on the Authors on Mission podcast.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or a leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, Go build some authority.